Welcome to welcome to webinar number 11. This is about using blockers, and it also deals with combinations. And we're going to go through 3 hands pre-flop about how to use some blockers and combinations, and 2 hands post-flop to help us with our interpretation of how we view different hands. So in this first one, it's from Morton. I have 3 hands from the forum and 2 hands in replayer. So in this first hand, it might have actually been a hand that's shown up before. So I'll be brief on this one. I think this one's really interesting. Heroes in small blind with ace queen, and a bunch of people limp. So Morton, of course, just kind of limps along there in the small blind. And the flop comes ace queen 10. So when we look at a flop like this, I mean, it is very scary when there's a bunch of people in it. But this is just a review of some numbers that you guys probably know, and just in case, it's a good reminder. We want to look at combos of different types of hands, like the combos of top pair, the combos of 2 pair, combos of a set, stuff like that. So how many in this hand? Let's pretend for now, you don't have ace queen. What are the combos of just a single ace X hand? So you don't have ace queen in your hand. What are the odds that someone has a hand like ace 2? Sorry, not the odds. Just how many combos of ace 2 are available on a flop that contains an ace? Good call. So up here, we will put this. We're just going to fill these in, and these are going to kind of help us throughout the webinar. So combos of ace X, if you have an ace blocker, 12. Someone else besides Big Nicks, how many combos of ace X are there with no blockers at all? Good. So that's really important to know that at any time, there's always going to be 16 combinations of an unpaired hand. Okay. How about for pairs? How many combinations of a pair are there? Anybody at all? Good. Thank you, sir. So basically, there are 6 combinations of a pair, so we'll fill that in here. So now, I guess I just asked the same question twice right here. Combo of pairs with 1 blocker, I guess also. That's combos of a set on the flop with a blocker. So this is where blockers come in. Let's say that we don't have ace queen for now. We look at the flop. 1 of the cards is gone, so there's 3 left. So how do we get that? If you look here, we could choose a pair like 8s. There's 6 combinations. Let's say that the 8 of clubs is gone because it's on the flop, so we have to take those away. So you're left with 3 combinations. Now, what that means in terms of using blockers to your advantage is it means that anytime there's a flop, there's exactly 3 combinations of a set. So let's look at this board where now we'll actually use our hand. So we have blockers to to an ace and a queen. So how many, simple question, how many combinations total are there of a set of aces or a set of queens in this hand when we have ace queen? Exactly, there's 2. How many combos are there of a set of 10s here? Good. So that's really, really important. So we have to remember and take this into account in games that anytime we're thinking, oh man, I think someone has a set or something like that. There are 3 combos of that if the only blocker to it is on the, well, flop Turner River, I guess. Now, I have a question, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm hoping someone does. How many combinations are there of 2 pairs? So for now, again, let's pretend that we don't have ace queen. How many combinations of ace queen are there? Is it 9? Is it 8 or 9? That's what confuses me. Do you know for sure? 9? Oh, you typed it twice, so I'll take your word for it. Thank you, sir. So combos of 2 pair, there's 9. Combos of top pair, there's 12. Well, I guess times however many top pairs. Top pair kickers. Okay, thank you. So 9 for 2 pair. So in other words, if we see a flop of ace queen 10, there are 9 different ace queens available. Morton happens to have one of them here. So we said number of top pairs on flop with blockers. That was 12 times the kickers, the possible kickers. Now one more thing. Now I need to write this. This is my worst nightmare. Combos of straights. And to keep it simple for now, we'll use this as our example where there's only one straight possible. One sec. You could write out the combos. It would take a long time though. But if you do go into Poker Stove, you could do this. You could enter a hand or whatever. And then down here, it would tell you all the individual hands. There's also a program. I used to have it, but I wasn't very fluent with it. And it's called Combinator. And then that can tell you the exact hands. You could even pick certain things like all the 2-pair combos, all the flush combos, all of these. And it'll show you what percentage of someone's range is devoted to a single pair, a bottom pair, a high card, or what. You could basically customize it any way you want. Let's just keep it there. I think it's combinator.net. I'm not sure though. Question mark. But you could Google it by saying Combinator. So basically, Beagnix is right here. For the number of straights, that's 16. So that's why this hand is really important. In this hand, Hero bets the flop with top 2 pair, which is great, and 2 people call. Hero bets the turn, which is a 5, and Under the Gun shoves into 2 people. Under the Gun clearly does not care that there's a lot of action in this hand. Why? Because Under the Gun has a strong hand. But if we break this hand down using blockers, we can see that there's only one pocket aces and pocket queens combo left. But guess what? There was no raise pre-flop, so whatever. There's 3 pocket tens combos, but guess what? There's 16 king jacks. Because remember, there's 16 combos of a non-pair hand. Thank you. Actually, this is a really good point. Under the Gun could have aces. He's right. Because no one raised behind, so he could be trapping Under the Gun with aces. But if we really broke it down in this hand, we say, how do blockers influence these hands? There is one combo of aces. There is one combo of queens. There is 3 combos of tens. And there are 16 combinations of king jack. So which hand is this guy going to have likely overall? It's literally slightly over 3 times as likely he will have king jack versus any of these hands, because it's 16 versus 5 other ones. So Hero should make a fold here. And if I don't know what he had. Do we know what he had in this hand? Did you ever say, Morton? Oh, Hero made a fold. I don't know. Maybe you guys can find it. I don't know. Oh, you deleted it. Okay, cool. Do you remember? Wise, it's way more likely he has king jack than any other hand here. Okay. At any rate, that's a great hand, just utilizing simple combinations and blockers to say, like, okay, this guy's. I'm back, I hope. So much for people coming to my house to fix the internet. I'm still on 56K. Okay, so let me read these really quick. So, Puyan, is it everything recording still? You're right, 27 possible 2-pair hands on that board. Yeah, that's a great point. Because there's 9 ace queens, there's 9 ace tens, there's 9 queen tens. So I guess there's 27 2 pairs. But it's always weird because whenever I see, for example, say this guy did have queen 10, for example, and let's just say we didn't have ace queen, so our blockers don't come into play here. Okay. So let's say he has queen 10. I always wonder why they call the flop but then shove the turn. Like, why did their hand change personalities all of a sudden? Why did it go from, oh, this is just a call, now it's worth tons? Most of the time it's either because the 5 made a huge impact on their hand because that's when he changed, or it means that they have the nuts all along. And then the nuts here happen to be the largest combination of possibilities, I guess. Or the king jack contains the most combos. So I go, well, the 5 didn't change anything unless he had exactly 10-5, queen-5, or ace-5. I suppose ace-5 is actually would make sense here. He called with a 1-pair hand, shoved when it turned into a 2-pair hand. PKR says, shouldn't those 2-pair combos be in his range as well? And on the ace-5 turn? Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, most people, if they have queen 10 and they call the flop, they're usually going to call again because nothing really changes. The only time it changes is when the card that they change on helps their hand. Like it literally, like some guy hits his flush, now he raises or something like that. Or it comes from when someone slow plays the nuts. If the 5 helped him here, it's going to probably be ace-5. But then because we have a blocker to an ace, there's even less combinations of 2-pair. There's 9 combinations of ace-5, but now if we take out an ace, there's even less. How many is that? I don't know. That's hard. 6? Something like that? Big Nukes, you're a genius. Figure this out. Yeah. And also, this is right. The question, Big Nukes, is there's 9 combinations of ace-5, but if we take out an additional ace, now there's 6. Is that what it is? Okay, cool. So then even if we added in here ace-5 and 6 combinations of that, well, that's actually something we beat though. So, but look at this. So now let's say we beat ace-5. So that's 6 combos. But guess what? We still lose to all these hands. We're a 21-5 disadvantage. In other words, we're a 4-1 dog. So you would have to have 4-1 odds to break even. And I don't think you do. I don't know what it is, but I don't think you do. What happened? Can you guys still see that? Okay. So you would have to have 4-1 just to break even, and obviously big blind 30. We're not just hoping to break even. So I think this is kind of just a really interesting hand there. Second hand, FC Prospects Ace Queen suited. Basically, he's versus a player who he thinks is a break-even reg. In this hand, it's 501,000 in $8 180 man. The button shoves for about 8 normal big blinds, and a break-even reg from the small blind shoves 40,000. He ISO shoves. Big blind hero has 20 big blinds and has ace queen of clubs. Now what? How, like, basically the questions are, what type of range does villain have, and do blockers influence his range at all? What do you guys think? Oh, sorry. So basically, button is shoving about 8 big blinds. A break-even reg, ISOs in the small blind. Hero is what? Or sorry, hero should think what about blockers? Not necessarily do you call or do you fold, but just what type of range do you put villain on? Do our blockers make any type of influence on our decision? Snap because he's Danish. That sounds ethnically biased. No, I don't know. But you're Danish too, right? Is that Denmark? Danish is Denmark. Okay. Oh, really interesting. Now, see, Marcus is constructing a range here that he's potentially putting him on. He says like ace-8 through ace-king. Not 18. Ace-8 through ace-king. King-queen. Maybe 6-6 plus. And maybe deuces through 5-5 as well. So we're saying also maybe queen-jack. I mean, I might even think that this... That's a really great point. Ha 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 ha. Excellent point. Queen, queen, AA, very unlikely. Literally, it's half as likely. Remember, there are 6 pairs, but if you have a blocker to one, there's only 3. Oh, that's what I meant here. 3. So if there's ever a blocker to a pair, there's 3 left. There's 3 combos left. And king, king is probably not shoving either because he wants value, right? And also ace, queen is very unlikely. So this is where this thing comes in, combos of ace X if you have an ace blocker. That means there's 12 ace kings. There are 12 ace jacks. There are 12 ace tens. There are 12 ace nines, and there are 12 ace eight. So look, if you put him on ace 8 through ace king, and then there's, how many combos of ace queen are there if we have, because we have double blockers? Big nukes, do you know that? Is it 8? Because it's like, I don't know what it is. I get confused. 9. Okay, it's 9. Thanks. So if we add the, oh, 3 times 3. Ah, interesting. Cool. So if we add these up, you basically, let's just say if he has ace king, you lose, just to keep it simple. You lose versus 1, tie versus 1, win versus 4. You're a 4-1 favorite versus ace range. Then you throw in king, queen, you dominate that. This is where it's interesting. And you know that he probably doesn't have queens and aces, way less likely, and he's probably not going to shove those ones. I think this is a really, really interesting spot where his range is mostly hands that you dominate. That's a really interesting point about only flatting, or sorry, shoving instead because calling is stronger versus reg. You're right. You're right. And middle pairs too. So then we add the combinations of 5s. There's 6 of them. 6s, 6 of them. And we just go etc. So 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s. That's 7. So 7 times 6, 42 combos. But then there's a blocker to queens, so plus 3 queens. But then we don't even think he has queens, aces, and kings. So wouldn't you do something different? I don't know. So anyway, we could just say there's 42 combos of those pairs. There are 69 combos of the ace 8 through ace king. So its range is weighted towards the ace, and it might contain more of the ace X hands. This is a spot where even though we have blockers, his range looks like it's hands that we dominate only. So this seems like a great spot to call. Even though we talk about, oh yeah, 20, 21 big blinds, don't chop off your balls. It seems like his range is right in our wheelhouse, basically, where he's going to turn over ace 8 a lot. Look at these 12 combos of ace 8, 12 to ace 9. And we can analyze this because we know with blockers, if you have a blocker to an ace, there's 12 left. Any questions about that one at all? Welcome, Casper. Well, right. This is where it's kind of ironic in a way. We say usually when we have blockers, it's less likely someone has a hand. But in this hand, it seems like his range is most hands that we dominate. So even though we have blockers and it's less likely he has those cards, we still can't forget about analyzing what we perceive villain's range to be. Because the fact that he's just isoing from the small blind makes it look like he has these type of hands. So just because we have blockers doesn't always mean that he doesn't have those hands. And yeah, and king queen. Now let's see what Pedro says. How often do we think that a guy is shoving ace 8 for 20 big blinds? Where does this range come from? Looks like I might be missing something. That's a great point. And that's something I struggle a bit too. Like, does this guy understand that we have 20 big blinds behind? Or does that tighten him up? I think one of the reasons here is that he's kind of a break even regular. So like he's playing a lot but isn't very good. So I guess subtly, to me at least, it implied that he's not paying attention to the intricacies that we might see. Um, but a lot of times guys don't flat. It's the problem is that flatting doesn't become an option for some guys. It's like calling equals bad, therefore you're left with a fold or a shove. Um, and here he kind of FC prospect kind of alluded to that by saying he feels that he's the kind of player who knows two moves, ship or fold. So like if someone, say for instance, someone had ace eight or ace nine, and if calling isn't an option to them because that's an inherent bad play according to sit and go standards, then they're left with the fold or a shove. But totally agree with what you're saying, Pedro, for sure. So if he's a break-even reg, you're just thinking that he's an absolute nit here. So like, what does someone do? Let's say his range was ace 10 plus, and that was his only like, what does he do with ace 10? Okay, so he's not dumb. Like that's definitely commendable to earn $5,000. You could fold here. You could definitely argue to fold here. I hate when a bunch of people type and I can't tell. Why is my? Can you guys still hear me? There we go. Okay, it was doing something weird. Um, he knows, he says that he makes too many overshoves. That helps big time. PKR adds maybe he is just thinking it to be a 13 big blind shove because that's what big blind has behind since he wouldn't fold ace 8. So flatting means he has lost 8k already. Um no, actually. I think I think this is actually reasonable. Um the thing is what I'm seeing here is, what if he's interpreting it as he can't flat basically? And he can't re-raise. If he re-raises, the minimum raise is 13, and then he can't fold, so he's left with a shove. But as I Pedro adds, also people's ranges change a ton with having that stack size. Agree. I think a thinking player would. I think you would. Let me finish this. And if he is break even, he would not shove ace eight that much. I actually don't know what he had here. Do we know? Should we look yet? I think your point is great, Pedro. I think it's really, really great. Let's see what people say. Bubble says you would call. He had fives in this hand. I mentioned that he's probably going to have twos through jacks, ace two through ace, king, king, queen, king, jack a lot. So he had fives. I guess if he showed us fives, we could consider folding. I think if this is a $3 rebuy, we can be much more willing to call because we're even further away. I said ace. One sec. That I think is important what Marcus said, because I think it takes a lot of intelligence to be able to also think about things that haven't happened yet, which requires thinking about people behind you. But instead, a lot of people are just concerned with EV thinking, where it's like, I'm ahead of his range. This is plus EV, therefore I do it. Easy black and white decision. To PKR, why I said ace deuce, I see, it may not be true. I've seen a lot of guys just ISO ace X easily. I don't think it's good, but I see a lot of, semi decent people kind of robotically do that. I'm ahead of a button range. I can't flat, therefore I'm left with shove. But it definitely doesn't apply to everybody. Just like when Pedro says, does a guy do ace eight there? Like, totally agree with what you guys are saying. Or sorry, in a non-rebuy 180, 20K is an amazing stock size at this point in the game. And you're probably like in the top 5 or 6, and that's probably the chip leader in the tournament. But in $3 rebuy, it's probably much different. Marcus says he doesn't feel like folding and he wants to go to showdown. Oh, I'm just talking to myself. Don't mind me. I think it just depends on the guy, like for what Pedro's saying. Like, I don't think shoving ace-8 is a good idea, but a lot of guys will do it. But I totally agree with what you're saying. Okay, back. I'm sorry, guys. So if he is isolating the range supplied, should we call? Yeah, I mean, basically, we just want to dominate a lot of hands. I mean, personally, I think this is, I might be like nines, ace, queen, maybe eights, ace, queen here. But ace, jack could be okay. I mean, really, it comes down to the more ace X's he shoves, the better ace, jack gets. That's what it comes down to. I guess it just depends on his range. What sucks is this is what Entom kind of said when he joined a webinar before. It's like someone's range is kind of concentrated in a certain part here, where he's more likely to shove a pair and an ace because that's easier, and which would make ace jack a lot better. Okay. Any last questions about this before moving on to third hand? We have 5 hands total. Okay. Still connected on the call. Oh my god. And here's my stupid pop-up. Because I think some like virus thingy. Okay. Third hand, Marcus Vick. A player opens at its big blind 1,000 in a $3 rebuy. This is a good hand. Where did he raise from? Under the gun +1. So he has a starting stack of 17 big blinds, and he makes a raise to 2050. He's 15-12 over 1,500 hands. He is very likely to be on a tight range. Marcus feels he needs pocket tens here. My questions are, what do you feel Villain's range is? We'll start with the first one. Yeah, what do you feel Villain's range is? Seems pretty straightforward. He starts the hand with 17 big blinds under the gun +1. And he's opening to 2050. What position are you? You could flatten the big blind. Oh, Hero, I'm sorry. Hero has 14 big blinds. You could flat. So we'll get to that. First question, his range. Villain's opening range. Okay, so we're saying like ace 10, king jack suited, king queen, sevens. Okay, and Marcus Vick is saying ace queen, tens, eights. This is it's $3 rebuy, so you're probably like 70 people left, maybe, right? Because you're not as deep as a non-rebuy 180 here. So I think that kind of helps a little bit. Stage of game is important. Good point. So we're saying somewhere around ace 10, king jack suited, king queen, 7 sevens. Yeah, he's 15-12 with 17 normal big blinds. Now 15-12 might be his overall thing, including all late position things too. So he's probably tighter. Thank you. That right there. Well, it's not a steal. That's really, really important. There is no stealing here. This is a value raise. Because he has no reason to get involved here unless he's getting feisty. And most of the time, someone's not really going to get too feisty there. Next question. Well, let me read Pedro's comment first. Depends on him. Let's say it's one of those new German players. I mean, if we have no information that he's raising 10-8 suited, we can assume that he's not, because most conventional type players are more likely to fold it than to raise it. Is he seriously going to raise call eights? Maybe, because there's a lot of rules that say you can't raise fold for 20 big blinds, and a lot of players don't want to break rules. Oh, 10-8 suited would be a great raise here, but you're different than a lot of people. Like, you're a very creative individual. Even this is really interesting here. I have a question. How can you determine 15-12? If someone's 15-12 over a decent sample size, how can you tell if they're truly tight and then just like make standard shoves, or that they're creative and get involved like Pedro, but they still appear to be tight? How can you tell? Steal percentage, really, really good. You will see guys with let's add this, like 40% steal is a mark that's kind of denotes a player who gets involved. Also, this is a good time where I wouldn't give credit to anybody for getting fancy here unless I'm aware that they're capable of raising wide. This is where evidence comes into play, um, and steal percentage too. Like, cause you know, if you play with Pedro long enough, you'll see him make a weird raise like that, you know, sometime, and then you can go, huh, he gets involved, and that's a really good reason to reshove here. But when we don't have that information, it's probably better to assume that they're not getting out of control, because it takes more balls to raise in that spot, and a lot of guys will just be tight. Marcus adds, I think we can assume even good rigs are really tight there. Agree. Because even take the post Buffy Slayer made about like you can't raise with 20 big blinds, right? That's a class of thinking that says when you have a certain stack size, you can't do certain plays. There's a lot of guys who say it's push or fold for 17 big blinds. Because, well, really they have like 11 or 12 true big blinds. And so it's like with 11, 12 big blinds, you can only play push or fold. There's a lot of people who play that way. Right. It takes a lot of thinking and creativeness. It's probably more likely someone's not being creative there than when someone is. So for now, like when we don't have the physical evidence that says Pedro's a maniac, you know, we should give Pedro credit for just being tight. And then once we see him do stuff that's fancy, then we can ingest or adjust our interpretation of it. So the next question is basically, I think, well, for this, no, his range doesn't change if we have nines. That's really important because nines doesn't really supply any blockers there. What if we had ace king? How does this change? That's really big right there. Probably doesn't have aces and kings. The combos are cut in half. Ace king is less likely too. There's only 9 combos, not 16. There's only 3 combos of aces, not 6. There's only 3 combos of kings, not 6. But nines, when we have nines, it really doesn't change anything because our blockers don't play a substantial role. There's nothing in his range that contains a 9 besides pocket nines. That's the only thing, because now there's only 1 combo of pocket nines left. But when you have ace king, it changes a lot of possible holdings for him because of the blockers. Check out this 32 versus 31 thing. I wanted to show you this. If we have nines and villain's range is 10s plus, sorry, let's do 9s plus and ace queen. Okay. 10s through aces. There's 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces. So that's 5 pairs. So 5 times 6 combos each. 30 plus the 1 for pocket nines because there's only 1 left. There's 31 pairs. If he has ace queen and ace king, that's 16 times 2. 32. So literally, if you have nines and villain has nines and ace queen, you're 50-50 for just in terms of which hand he has, right? But then it gets worse, right? Because you're not truly 50-50 in terms of the odds. You're 50-50 versus half of them in terms of odds, but then versus the other, you're 80-20. Or tied. So basically, if you're 80-20 half the time and 50-50 the other half of the time, sorry, 20-80, not 80-20, you're screwed. This is not a good hand to play if the villain's range is nines and ace queen. But if he has some other hands like king queen and king jack suited and a couple pairs you dominate, then maybe it's better. Now the question is, though, does he even call with hands that you dominate? Is he going to call off with 7 and 8s? Maybe it's possible. Maybe he doesn't fold. Right, he's less likely to call with those hands, so you're probably much worse than 50-50. So really here, if you shove, wow, my voice just squeaked like crazy. That's on video. If you shoved here, just one sec. Let me interject. If you shove here, you're almost hoping for folds. So all of a sudden, you're banking on folding equity here because this player is so tight. It's kind of an interesting hand here. That's a great question. What if you made it 4.5K? You could define his range, but now aren't you bluffing? Wow, I squeaked like a little girl. Wow. It does look uncomfortable for him, for sure. Then why not do it with deuce 7? Why not have fun with it if you're going to do it? Right, because if he shoved over you, you could snap fold 9s instantly. Well, right. But and you're folding no matter what. So literally, because the 9s make no influence on his range for blockers. So and if you're bluffing it and he's probably not flatting, if he flatted, that's where it matters. But if he's not flatting, then literally you just pick any crappy hand that doesn't influence blockers, and they're all essentially the same hand. Just it's more fun to bluff with 7-6 or 7 deuce than it is to bluff with 9s. At least you can get kind of a rush off of it or something. And it's also good because it kind of teaches you like a lesson for your poker career. Like, wow, I just bluff with deuce 7. I should bluff more. I still think we have to give credit to his position and stack size. 100% agree. Morton says, it just crossed my mind. Can we flat? It's only one big blind more. Yeah, flatting is definitely an option here. Definitely. I think 4.5K would be a great play if we put him on somewhat wider range, but I'm thinking he's very tight here. Maybe this is where I'm getting it wrong. Well, great point. What is interesting is that no matter how tight or how loose someone's range is, you can still have the exact same amount of folding equity on someone because a lot of players are proportional. Like, just hypothetical example. If a player raises 100% and folds bottom 50% and reshoves top 50, you will have the exact same folding equity value as a player who plays 9s plus only, but then folds 9s, 10s, and jacks if you re-raise. It's still half of his hands go away. Because once the money's in the pot, it doesn't really matter what hands are specifically in his range, under the assumption that if he folds X percent of them, it doesn't matter what the range is. It's just X percent. That's a hypothetical. Of course it matters what's in the guy's range. But Pedro has a point here. If you made it 45, this guy might freak out with 10s. He might freak out with ace queen and then fold those hands. But then do it with 7-6 too. Any other questions? What did you do? So you folded? What is this? So Bobble says ship it. Does the fact, I put this in the post, the fact that he made it 20-50, is that like a hotkey? I don't know. It just doesn't look like he's really stealing here. We would want someone who's kind of involved. So it would be like a large steal stat, somewhere in like the high 30s or low 40s. And then against the other guy's fold. Pedro, what's your steal stat, by the way, dude? It's probably pretty high, right? Can we find that number out and then be like, well, you see, that's a good thing. It can never be too high. If it's not 100, it's not high enough. Yeah, it'd be really interesting for you to put that in this post. Here's the link so you can take it. Because then if we see a guy who is way less than that, that's how we could balance here. Shove versus guys who have nice steal percentages, like Marcus Vick was saying, and then full versus the others. I just think it's really interesting here in this about blockers, how nines has almost no influence on blockers. But if we had ace king, all of a sudden it changes a lot. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of I agree with you, Pedro, because a lot of guys will play differently. There's creative guys like you who get involved, and then there's guys who don't, and then there's everything in between, where they only get involved on the button or something like that. That's a great question. If we call here and check the flop, it kind of puts us in a weird spot. This might be a spot where we could call and donk bet because it kind of establishes the tone for the hand. Because if you check, now you're not going to know. Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes even you donk bet just to establish it because you're going to be confused. If you call and the flop is king high and you check and he bets, you're not going to know anymore. So if you just lead out yourself, kind of put a headache. Well, actually, I think it could be like if he's on high steal, we're more inclined to fold since a bigger part of his pre-flop is due to steals, which makes him even tighter from early position. Oh, okay. I'll skip it. It's interesting. Okay. I mean, yeah. But then maybe we should just reshove wider, I guess. But see, he's in early position. That's a good point. Can't you click steal and see where steal's from? Or can't you click pre-flop raise and just see like the different percentages as they go through early position, middle, and late? And if you see the numbers all leaning towards late position, it's still a fold. Yeah, it's the fact that he's in early position. Not many people steal like Pedro from early position. Oh my God, that's right. He's 100% right. Steal and hold'em managers cut off too. This makes no impact. You'd have to look at his pre-flop raise from early position. Because you might see a guy who's 15-12, but it's from an average of late position being loose like Pedro or whatever, but early position being like a giant knit box. That's why, and that's why 10-8 suited is great. Exactly. Because no one can click, no one's really clicking on VPIP and being like, let's see specifically where you get involved from. Because steal is cut off only, and button small. Wow. Baller. I believe you also get girls to ask you out, so that just makes you double baller. Okay. Fourth hand. Let's look at some spots with blockers post-flop. This is Fenman 7-7's hand. It's from a coaching session earlier today. He makes a pretty standard open here. He gets flatted from, here are reads on this guy. He's 2+2. A lot of posts on 2+2, so he definitely reads a lot. He's a reg, I suppose. I don't know what his results are. Fenman said based on his style of play, he really believes that he's being somehow trapped here. So with that, we've established reads on villain. Now let's see what the flop brings. This is the flop. Villain checks. No matter what we do here, do we block hands? If so, what do we block? Because Fenman feels, or in the moment felt like he was kind of being tricked here. So what kind of range do you put him on? What kind of hands do we block if you feel we block any hands? Does he have, by the way, can someone answer me? Does he have a Stewie Griffin avatar where he's holding a gun? Because if so, I've talked to this guy before. I just can't remember. Right, there's Great point, Marcus. At this point, there's no history yet. There's absolutely no history. So great point. PKR says, I think he will most of the time check raise with a made hand, but donk out more often with none made hands, maybe some draws. Right. Okay. Now, if he had a draw, though, that means he has Jack 10. Why did he flat with Jack 10? If he's this, like, you know, I guess conventional pre-flop, at least conventional pre-flop style. Because that's the only draw here is Jack 10. I suppose there's King Jack for a gut shot. Puyan says, check back, you might still have the best hand. Aces is unlikely, kings is possible. Betting doesn't seem to achieve anything. Betting doesn't seem to achieve anything unless you're going to double barrel like the 10 of hearts, which would be the nut turn card for our hand in terms of draws, or like a second heart. But then if you feel you're being trapped, I agree. Betting doesn't really seem to achieve anything here because if you bet, you're essentially bluffing. And it really doesn't seem like many hands will fold. Here's a great question. What hands, this is, I'll tell you what Fenman said. I asked Fenman, I said, Neil, what type of hands will fold if there are hands that will fold? He said, maybe if this player is flatting pre-flop with 5, 6s, 7s, 8s. He will get those hands to fold. 5, 6s, 7s, 8s, that's 4 pairs, so that's 6 times 4, so there's 24 pairs that will fold if he has those in his range. Maybe 2s and 3s if he has those two, I don't know. And Puyan, that's interesting because Neil said the same thing. He said he might peel once. Okay. And then, okay. So C betting isn't that effective. Very good. So there's no reason to make a normal type of C bet here. Is he flatting pocket pairs pre? Maybe. I don't know. It's a great question. What do you have blockers to really quick? Someone tell me what you have blockers to. Good. Aces and jacks. Jack 10, but then he probably doesn't have Jack 10 in his range, but you're right though. Aces. Now post flop. This is what I like about post flop. Does the board block any hands? If so, what? So instead of your own hand with blockers, let's think about the other cards that act as blockers, the community cards. Are there any blockers on this flop? Bingo, 9s, queens, and 4s. Queens is a hand that we're afraid of here, and 9s too. But there's blockers to those on the board. So in terms of pairs, aces there's a blocker, queens there's a blocker, jacks there's a blocker, 9s there's a blocker. So if he has a pair, what are the 2 most likely pairs that he has here? And we will go back to what PKR said in a second. Good, 10s and kings, one of which is vulnerable because there's a higher card. Now, this is what's interesting. PKR is being a genius here. There's a guy named Jason Somerville who plays by name of Jay Carver online, and he's like, he even won like a bracelet for like $500,000 in the WSOP this summer. And this guy's a genius. And I used to watch this guy's videos all the time because his post flop analysis was just like, it was just second to none. It was incredible. And there was a hand I remember where he was talking about a certain play, and I've never really done this play, and this seems like the best play to me. And PKR is pretty close to nailing it right on the head. You really think you're being trapped here. You're playing against a competent player. If you make a normal C bet, it doesn't really achieve anything, just like Puyan said. But if you check, then what? Right? So this is where Jason Somerville came up with this really cool idea. He says, what if you just bet 6K? Just bet the min, or just very slightly over min, like PKR is saying. Not a standard C bet size, not even a small C bet. Just like the stupidest looking min bet or close to min bet that you've ever seen in your life. One of two things is going to happen. say Sky Psyker 12, whatever his name is. Say he has kings, and if you bet 6K, what do you think he's gonna do? Right. It's really hard to just flat call kings there when someone bets 6K. It's almost like you have to raise it. If you don't raise, it's like a crime or something. If he has tens, he's probably not going to raise. If he did have aces, even though it's less likely because of the blocker, he'd feel the need to raise. The only hands he might flat are queens and nines. But what if then, if he did flat, you could bet 6K on the turn again, he'd have to raise you. The 6 to 8 will tell us if he has kings or aces, even though kings is twice as likely as aces. It will tell you. So you could just bet like, what if you just bet 6,000? This would just like drill a hole through his head and just confuse the crap out of him. I agree with 6666. Yeah. I agree with Chris because it may tell us what he has. I'm gonna say most often it will. But here's the other thing that can happen according to Jason Somerville. If he doesn't raise you and he calls you, it probably means that he has a hand that can go to showdown, but it's not that strong because it wasn't worth raising. Huyan says, but don't you think that pocket pairs get value to flat? They do. But that's why this play is not a one-part play. It's a two-part play. Once he flats you, most of the time now, he's telling you that he has a hand that wasn't worth to raise. And so then what does Jason Somerville do? Now he makes a real size bet on the turn to get rid of those weak hands. So basically, when you flop bet, you're asking him a question. You're saying, do you have the weaker part of your range or the stronger part of his range? And when villain calls, he's telling you he has the weaker part that's vulnerable. So then you attack those vulnerable hands on the turn with part 2 of your play. Turn card does matter, but we have an idea of what we think this guy's range is. It's probably pocket pairs, right? So if he flats, he's probably going to have queens or nines. Maybe if he didn't decide to raise, which probably some portion of the time he's going to raise those. But now he could have jacks, even though less likely because of the blocker, tens, maybe eights, and sevens, sixes, fives if he calls those pre-flop. But basically, like say he calls here with tens and the turn cards a whatever, like a 2. And if all of a sudden you bet like 24K, and what if he just called again? Like he made a hero call there, bluff him on the river now. Like make it really, really hard for this guy. And that's why Jason Somerville is so great, because he makes bets that kind of ask questions to try and pick what part of a player's range they have. And then once he finds out that they have the weak portion of their range, he attacks them with larger bets. Chris says, but okay, we bet small, he calls. We have to do the same thing on the turn, right? Well, if he called, now his range is weighted towards hands that aren't good enough to raise, unless he's slow playing you with queens or nines. So then so say if you bet 6, he calls, the pot's 45. Now on the turn, you bet like 28. You bet a real bet on the turn, because now you assume that he's most likely to have the weaker, more vulnerable portions of his range here, because the ones that are strong are most likely going to raise on the flop. Casper's right, bet bigger. Okay. Chris says, bigger bet will pretty much destroy our plan. No. It's part of our plan here, because it's a 2-part plan. Part 1 is our flop bet. We're asking a question. Do you have hands that are worth raising or hands that are only worth calling? And then once he tells you, then you attack it. Well, I guess if he raises, you fold, obviously, and you lose the minimum. But then if he calls, now you know he's more likely to have a vulnerable hand like tens here, and then you attack that hand. It's harder versus randoms because randoms will have a wider range of hands here. But then versus a random with a wider range, you could just c-bet like normal or check back, and it's a totally different thing because we're targeting specific hands in this setup. PKR says smaller bets won't work because he will call down if you bet. Right, exactly. So we change the bet on the turn. So instead of 6 to 8, you bet 14 or 16. Well, in the turn, you want to make your bet forceful, get him to fold. So you'd probably want to make a slightly larger bet than normal. Well, yeah, that's why this plan, it's a weird plan. We're like, okay, because of our blockers, we think you have a certain hand range, so we're going to attack those. So you make a bigger bet on purpose. Casper says, or you bet small again. Right. And river bet. Exactly. That's even like a delayed version of this. You could bet because he would. Casper's got a point here. Do you think if he was slow playing a set of queens, do you think he would ever check call twice? Most guys, when they have a huge hand, if they check call flop, it's always check raise turn. So what if you bet 6K here, 8K on the turn, and he check called both, and then you just blew him off on the river? He says for strands, I can't tell the number of times they've always just folded to 1/3 pot bet. Exactly. No, in all situations, dude. If this was a random player and I had deuce 3 offsuit here, I would just bet like 14K or, somewhere between 13 and 16 and then just count my money. But versus this guy, it seems that we can do something a little bit different. Even 13 to 16 versus this guy could be okay, but it doesn't really serve a purpose unless we're pure bluffing, which would be totally fine. Yeah, we are playing no limit, and no limit does stuff with low numbers too, not just high numbers. It should be called no limit in both directions, I suppose. We have to remember that there is a min bet feature. When we see randoms bet min, we go, oh, what a moron. He just bet 1 into 10. But maybe sometimes that's the best play, No limit in both directions. Hold 'em. Okay, let's see what develops here. So Fenman checks back, and now Villain makes what looks to be a very believable value bet here. And at this point, there's really nothing you can do unless you're planning on bluffing, but I don't really see what you can make fold here. At this point, it doesn't really look like he has anything in his range that's going to fold unless he's bluffing. Like if he had 5, 6, 7, 8s, wouldn't you expect him to just check again? Most of the time, it's possible he could do something different. Tens is the only hand that might fold to a shove here. Probably not jacks because we have a jack, so it's unlikely he has jacks. The 4 is a brick, but it just looks like he was somehow going for a check raise on the flop. To me, really, if I had to say which hand I believe he has more often than any other hand here, I would say pocket kings, because kings and tens are the only hands without blockers, but kings is more likely to bet the turn than pocket tens because it's still very strong. Yeah, and that's a great point too. Like we don't have extra info from not doing anything on the flop, so then shoving the turn doesn't seem like good timing. It's the whole like being in the right place at the right time when you're going to make a good bluff, right? And sometimes it's the wrong time, sometimes it's the wrong place. Yeah, good question. Cool. So hero folds. All right, last hand. This is just an exercise in hand readings. Well, that's the whole point. Good point about not 3-betting kings. He said that he had a gross feeling that he was being trapped here by this guy. And you do know there are definitely a breed of regulars who will flat those hands. There's definitely people who do that. So he just said he had a really, really bad feeling here when this happened. Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting hand. What I like about it is in terms of talking about blockers, remembering that blockers are on the board or like on flops too, and not just our own hole cards, and seeing like, oh, there's a blocker to pocket queens out there. For some reason, there's this different kind of psychology. It's like, oh, he could have a set of queens, but then it's really just a blocker to a set of queens. It's like kind of being optimistic or pessimistic, I guess. That's why I find this hand interesting. Okay. So here is 3-handed into 180. It's $8 one. So it's an RBM hand. He makes a raise here. Villain flats in the big blind. All we really know about Villain up to this point is he's given a few walks BBB, and he's not the greatest player on earth, basically. So he's not that great, at least so far. That's all the reads we really have here. Here comes the flop. This is another example of blockers on the board. Yeah, stop and go is probably not his move here. Oh, whoa. Okay, we did not know this. This is really interesting. That changes a lot. Huh. Did he just have like one big win, or is he a consistent winner? He's able to make a move. Oh, okay. Well, this is more info than we had before. Okay. So look at this flop. Blockers on the flop, way less likely as a king. So instead of being afraid of an ace or a king, well, I mean, if he's up 25K, wouldn't he rejam an ace pre-flop or some type of stronger hand pre-flop? So anyway, instead of being afraid of like two kings, just be like, oh, it's less likely he has a king. I think is a good way of thinking about it. So the question here, though, is what do we get value from? Nothing. Exactly. Exactly. Very good. So the only reason to bet would be to end the hand now. Now, at the time, we didn't know this guy was up that much money. So if in my opinion, there are three hands you might get value from a bet. Nothing, but there are three hands you might potentially get value from. What are they? No, not tens, jacks, queens, because I guess that would be reverse value. So I guess there are three hands that reverse value. I guess those would shove pre or do something. Right. So I guess before you, him being up 25K changes my opinion on this a little bit because I didn't know that at the time. 10 jack is one of those three hands. What are the other two hands? I wouldn't think that this, knowing a guy's up 25K, I wouldn't think someone would flat 10 jack here. But yes, very good. Queen jack, queen 10, 10 jack. The three gut shots. So besides that, there's really no value. So hero checks behind. Turn is a blank. Villain checks. Now what should hero do? Yeah. Because we have some showdown value. And again, there's nothing really that calls besides 10 jack, queen 10, queen jack. But then we didn't even perceive this guy to have them now that we know he's up that much. There's no reason to bluff here, basically. Now, this is really interesting. This is one of the discussions that came up when in the coaching session. If we were to get value here from a gut shot, we asked ourselves what bet would do that, and the answer we got was 5 to 7,000. So you're saying even like bet 5K to make it look like you're just weak as crap, and then maybe he'd play back. Pedro says check down because we have showdown value. I agree. So you could bet 5K. I mean, most guys, I would assume a random's not just going to randomly check raise jam you. But at the same time, if someone was slow playing the flop, I would expect them to bet the turn in some way, unless they had like quad kings. I don't know. There's a lot of options here. I think mostly just check, I guess, because you might get more value from worse hands, like if he had sevens and he doesn't believe you because you checked twice. Hero checks again. River is a queen. Now what does hero do? Or should do? Well, there's no reason to bet the turn if he has an ace or a king, but a lot of people don't think that. They're just like, I check once, okay, I have to bet now, you know. But I agree with you. So here, my question for you with all the blockers is a quiz. What is the best, most likely hand that we still beat on the river? That's my question for you with all the blockers. That we beat. No, none of these are correct. I'll rephrase. What is the best, most likely hand that we still beat on the river? And I should say, just to be clear, most likely, not saying like in his range in particular, I just mean the most likely hand. In other words, like the biggest number of combinations that occurs most likely. Well, it couldn't be 10-9 because we have two blockers to nines, so there'd only be 9 combos of that. Same with Jack 9. No, there is a hand. You still, I mean, you beat hands. No. Well, even regardless of if he has 10-8 or not, which we thought at the time, we thought he could even have this hand in his range. Marcus is closest so far. I just mean on this board, hand reading this board, the most common occurring hand in terms of combinations that is on this board. This is hard. Not 3-4. Because 3-4, there's a blocker on the board. Not 6-7, but you're in the right direction. Not 10-9 because there's 2 9 blockers. 10-8 is the closest so far. Not 6-8. Jack 8. There it is. Well done, sir. Because all the ones with pairs have blockers. Jack 10 is a straight. Jack 9, there's 2 blockers. So Jack 8 is the highest ranked hand that has the most combinations. It's like a mind tornado, whatever you want to call it. Yes. So the best, yeah, I should say highest ranked, most likely in terms of combinations. Right. We would assume it's not in this range now that we know he's at 25. But I'm just saying the idea of looking on this board and being able to pick that out is really cool because when you can do that, if you can really understand how we got Jack 8, that means that you're diving into these 5 cards and trying to figure out what hand combinations are in there and how blockers affect those hands. And the more you do that, the better you will get at hand reading overall. Right. So I don't think he would flat with Jack 8. At the time when I was reviewing the hand, I thought he might. But he might, I don't know, because you'd be shocked at what he turned over. You wouldn't expect that from a guy who's up 25K. Now, if he like stop and go the flop, maybe that was his plan. Maybe he was going to stop and go all flops except for that flop. Maybe that's why. Which is a Jack 8 offsuit, not suited. There's 12 combinations of Jack 8 offsuit. I mean, maybe he was just literally going to stop and go like 99% of flops. And then this is the one flop that sucks. So maybe he doesn't even have to stop and go like an all in. What if he was just calling pre-flop with the intention of betting like 19,000 on every single flop except the absolute worst flops? What's that? I don't know. I haven't really seen anybody doing that. I'm just trying to come up with like an explanation why a guy who clearly isn't dumb is doing that. Just grasping at straws, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, I was enjoying reading that. Thanks, guys.